Welcome to episode 21 of the Progression Health Podcast. I'm here with researcher Jose Antonio. Jose, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Jose Antonio. Just a little bit of my background. I am currently a professor at Nova Southeastern University, located in South Florida. I'm also the co-founder and CEO of the International Society of Sports Nutrition. We are an academic nonprofit focused on sports nutrition. And then recently, myself and a colleague from neuroscience, we formed another academic nonprofit called the Society for Neurosports, where we try to combine exercise science and neuroscience. So probably in the last decade, I've focused most of my work on sports nutrition and dietary supplementation, mainly in trained people. I don't really do research in untrained people. So that's sort of in a nutshell what my background is. I got my, just academically for people who are curious, I got my PhD at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center, and I did a postdoctoral research fellowship there as well in the field of endocrinology and metabolism.
Brilliant. So you have an absolute wealth of research experience. Is that fair to say?
I've been doing this for over 3 decades. I always forget. It's like, holy crap, it's been a long time. I've been doing this. So yeah, I mean, I guess supposedly wisdom comes with age. That's what I'm hoping. So we'll see.
It's funny you should say that. I've recently heard that people who are older are not necessarily experienced or wiser. That's what someone's reminded me of, because you can have people who are in a position for a long time and they don't try and update their beliefs. But you definitely have. You're constantly putting out new research. So
thank you.
So you're doing that. So then, right now, what is your main area of research?
My main area of research is probably in the sort of overall dietary supplement category. Just to give you an example of what we're currently doing. I have 3 projects going on. One is just pure physiology, where we're looking at blood lactate response to stand-up paddling, which obviously that's one of my interests because I do stand-up paddling races here. So we go to local races and we measure blood lactate just to see what the response is. So that's one project. Another one is we're looking at the effects of a CBD containing product on recovery from delayed onset muscle soreness. And then a third one, we're looking at a specific pre-workout supplement on measures of cognition, sustained attention, and also pain threshold. So it's not focused on a specific supplement. It's really just anything that I find interesting. In fact, that's how I do research. It's like, is that an interesting project to do? Yeah, sure. Like, for instance, during the pandemic, we were actually able to collect data on the effects of creatine on cognitive function in untrained people, which was a little different for me because I don't like doing studies on untrained people, because at the end of the day, you and I probably deal with just trained people. Well, at least I do. I don't know about you, but I like doing studies on trained people because I want to apply it to people who exercise.
Yeah, you get more effectiveness. Whereas if someone isn't exercising, you don't know if they're going to be consistent or have they bought in, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So exactly. just to give an overview of supplements for people who are either exercising or not currently exercising, how should they view supplements? Should they be something that they can have an immediate effect? You have to, if you commit to a supplement, you have to commit to it, for life or for a couple of months. Could you give a kind of short way to look at supplements for people who maybe don't know a whole lot about them?
Yeah, that's a great question. The one thing I do that's might be a bit different than my colleagues, and this includes RDs, PhDs, medical doctors, et cetera, is I've never viewed supplements as a separate category from food. I hear this constantly, and I even ask my friends who actually do research, I hear this common refrain: you got to clean up your diet, however that is defined, before you take a supplement. And I always say, what data supports that? And the answer is no data supports that. Yet I think it makes people feel good emotionally, which is odd because science is supposed to be based on data, not emotion. And the God's honest truth is you could have the worst diet ever, and it is entirely possible that the supplement may actually be better for you. Just to give you an example, creatine, and I'll use that one as the most, the one I get the most questions about. Certainly, if you're a vegan or vegetarian, creatine will help you more than anyone. There's nothing a vegan or vegetarian can take that will give you those benefits. But let's say you just have a poor diet. I mean, I'm around college students all the time. Their diet is absolutely horrid. They might skip meals. Then they might have pizza. Then they might have fried chicken. I mean, it's just awful. I mean, when you're 18 years old, you could get away with it. But that group may actually benefit from creatine more so than the well-trained bodybuilder who is very cognizant of protein intake, carb intake, fat intake, takes whatever supplements he or she needs to achieve skeletal muscle hypertrophy. So the idea that there's a hierarchy of like foods first, supplements second makes zero sense. What it should be is, what's your goal? Does the food help you reach your goal? Does the supplement help you reach your goal? And if it does, then you do it. I mean, there's not an order you go through. So to me, the first thing I ask a person, is the goal. What's your goal? Do you have an athletic goal or is it a physique goal? You want to look prettier? Okay. It's kind of a weird goal because based on my experience working on and off in the category since probably the 1990s, nobody's ever happy with their physique. So even though they have a goal, it's like, well, I want to, get leaner, show my abs. And I find, okay, well, once you achieve that, then what? You can't hold it. You might diet down and look great for a month, maybe two. And then you sort of revert back to the way you eat. There are very few people who are so disciplined that they deprive themselves of, I guess, foods that may otherwise not be the best for physique. And I say, unless you're making money on it, which how many people make money in the physique sports? Like nobody does. But unless you're making money on it, does it really matter if you're, whether you're 15% fat or 18% fat? Well, to a lot of people it matters because, when we DEXA them, they cry, I'm fatter than I thought I was. I mean, I'm making fun of them. They don't really cry, but you could tell they're very upset because the number is like higher than they expect, when in fact, no one really gives a crap what your number is. So to me, the overall thing is, don't treat dietary supplements as a category separate from foods. They're all what I call consumables. You put them in your mouth, as a powder, as a capsule, or whatever, and it should help you achieve a goal. To me, that's the bottom line. It has to help you achieve a goal.
Yeah. So then you know your goal and you can see what works in line with that goal. For example, protein or creatine for fat loss, and then you determine the kind of, you do a cost analysis benefit kind of situation and work it out from there. It's cool.
That's sorry to interrupt you, Ross. That's exactly it. It's a risk reward assessment that everyone has to make. Like for instance, I'm trying to think what would be risky, because at the end of the day, most of these supplements aren't even risky, but let's pretend there's a perceived risk. So, and I get this question from, as it pertains to high school athletes, their parents might be like, oh my God, my son wants to take whey protein or he wants to take creatine. And I always assure parents that the risk is so low as to be non-existent, but they don't believe me. It's like, well, I read online that creatine in these protein supplements might cause kidney damage and the whole slew of stuff that comes out. And I don't know how, and I think that was one of your questions, but I don't know how you combat that, because to be honest, I've been dealing with this before you were alive. Let's go back to the 1980s when I was an undergrad in college. I heard the same thing. Now you fast forward to 2022, I still hear the same thing. So what is it about the culture, even in the, let's call it the health sciences, anything semi-related exercise? What is it about that culture that keeps promoting the same lies every year? And, I haven't come up with a good answer. And it's like, do people just not want to read, or they have a preconceived notion? And here's the scary part. I have students, like former students of mine, they'll text me and they say, hey, look what this professor is saying. And it's the same stuff probably you're aware of. It's like, I remember getting a screenshot. She said, hey, you're not going to believe what this professor said. So she screenshotted the PowerPoint presentation and it listed all the harmful effects of consuming protein powder. And it was just made up. It was literally just made up stuff. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is a college professor in a nutrition department. And I'm thinking, I can't explain this. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah. So that's interesting you say. So I was reading a book recently, and the point being made was like, some people have well intentions, but they could be completely wrong about something. And I was like, on one of my previous podcasts, I was talking to a behavior change researcher, and we were like, why, is there people who are interested in working for tobacco companies? So it's like, it's obviously damaging for health, right? But the book made me think that if there wasn't people doing something wrong or incorrect, it would make it easier to do the kind of the right thing, or your work, for example, right? And then maybe your points wouldn't be as well formulated, or they wouldn't be steel man. So instead of thinking like, why do they do it? It's kind of just like to keep yourself sane at night and not be like up all night. It's like for me anyway, I could think of it like it's an opportunity to make a better point. Does that make sense? I know it's a bit like airy fairy kind of thinking or wishful thinking, but
so it's an opportunity for people like us to make a better point, is what you're saying.
yeah, it gives us a better opportunity to make a counterpoint. Instead of like slam dunking the whole time, being like just take protein, it improves your life. Someone else.
Oh yeah, I'm a firm believer in free and open debate. I mean, I'm never for censoring points of view. In fact, sometimes the dumb points of view I like because it entertains myself, it entertains my colleagues. We have a good laugh about it, and then we realize, oh my God, we're really outnumbered. Like for every one of us who does research in exercise and sports science, there are literally and we're talking about educated clinicians, whether it's athletic trainers, medical doctors, dietitians, and even other scientists. There are literally thousands of them that have the opposite point of view. And one of the things I tell my students all the time in class is I say, I don't want you to believe me because I'm up here telling you. I don't want you to. If you think I'm wrong, make sure you look up the data yourself and come to a conclusion. And if I am wrong, tell me why you think I'm wrong. I say that to everyone. And because I don't want them to graduate from school and basically read, well, this expert said that. And I'm like, okay, well, just like you, I don't have time to read everything. Like, for instance, if someone said, something to the effect of a supplement that affects brain function, I'm no expert in neuroscience. I mean, so would I generally defer to that person? In general, yes. But at the end of the day, I still have access to that information. And it would behoove me to learn as much about it. But I would not foster an opinion that was based on nothing. Like I try not to give an opinion unless it's, I'll tell people, well, if I were to speculate or if I were to guess so that they know I'm speculating or guessing, but I would never say anything with certainty in a field that's outside of my expertise.
Yeah, very good practice. Actually, you remind me of the researcher Daniel Kahneman, and he said that, well, apparently this is what he does. When he gets proven wrong, he smiles. So when there's something that he's sure of, when he gets proven wrong, he's like, oh, good, because I've actually learned something new. Obviously, the way to counteract that is to not be too sure of too many things like outside your field, like you say.
Right.
But you just mentioned about the thousands of people who are going against you in the work you do. So actually, one of the listener questions I'll jump ahead to is this listener had their therapist say you need to stop taking creatine and protein because it's bad for your skeletal muscle. Can you think of any reason why, like a psychologist, someone in the psychology field might dissuade someone from taking protein or creatine if they're already taking it? Is there any potential side effects?
Well, the quick answer to that in terms of potential side effects is no, there aren't any. And let's deal with protein first. Protein, whether it's whey protein powder or casein or whatever, I tell people it's food. You're eating food. It's like telling people, well, you shouldn't eat chicken because that chicken protein might be, where'd that come from? The creatines might be more interesting because a lot of people don't realize creatine is already present in meat. And in its highest concentration, it's present in fish. And me personally, my opinion is I tell everyone, I think the single best food you could eat is fish, particularly fatty fish, because of the protein, the N3 fatty acids. It's just it's a great source, great food source. And I asked, well, so do you not eat fish? And most people, at least most people in South Florida, are like, yeah, I eat fish. So, well, then you're getting creatine. Maybe not as much as if you took a supplement, but you're still getting creatine. Now, I don't know why someone in the psychology field would be basically promoting, fabricating lies. I mean, that's like going to a physics class and telling them the earth is flat. It literally has, there's no basis for it. So again, that person, whoever it is no different than the hundreds I've personally met or the thousands I've read about. Actually, if you want to find just absolute nonsense about creatine and protein, just go on Twitter. It's like, oh my God. Or Instagram. There's this one company that keeps promoting that whey protein, when you consume it, it all gets converted to glucose and then eventually to fat. And I'm like, what are you guys even talking about? And rarely I'll comment, but I'm like, I think I'll say something. I'll say something like, this is nonsense, period. And then I'll leave. It's just, I'm like, people love to fabricate stuff. That's Ross. That's the only thing I think of. They just like to fabricate stuff, and why, I don't know. I still don't know the answer to that.
It's work to make a well-formulated point. To like find the research, put together like a good case, to pick apart someone else's argument and say, well, protein actually potentially has been shown to do this, but that would be the right way to do things.
It is work, but when you read some of these, they're sort of they're like advertisements on Instagram. There was one in particular on protein. Someone had to sit down and write it. So someone had to sit down and like, what could I fabricate today? Because I want to sell this vegan protein, and then we're going to say whey protein is the worst. So someone is on their computer typing falsehoods to sell a product. Now, do they know they're falsehoods? I'm like, do they know they're making stuff up? I bet you they do. And they don't care. Like you said, it's like working, for a cigarette company. Well, it kills people, but at least I got a job.
Yeah. There's some quote in there about you can't get a guy to change his mind if it affects his paycheck. Like, there's some quote out there about that. But that actually brings me to one of my questions I had. So I just got some plant-based protein. It was on sale on My Protein, the website. So I was like, oh yeah, I'll try this out. So if someone was to switch to plant-based protein sources or completely to a plant-based diet, that's something I actually want to do as I get older. I think it'll be healthier, but that's a different point. But is there any adjustments they should make or considerations based on the research?
Well, I think when you're looking at the plant-based protein, you're talking about plant-based protein powders. Is that what you're talking about versus consuming milk-based protein powders?
Yes.
Okay. So the plant-based, what's interesting is I've gotten questions about it a lot, and I have not embarked, or I haven't even got students to be interested in doing studies on plant-based protein, like pea protein or rice protein or hemp or whatever. And I want to, I just need to get a student who's interested, who might be willing to carry out the project. But with that said, I've never been against those protein powders. In fact, I corresponded with someone who said, I've been using whey protein for years, and recently, for whatever reason, she's getting GI upset, and she went through this whole host of symptoms. I'm like, that's kind of odd. Well, just try a different protein. And I suggested pea protein, rice protein. I said, sometimes these plant-based proteins are a good substitute because the most common complaint for the milk-based is always GI issues or gastrointestinal issues. And I said, if you're eating a mixed meal, so you're eating 3 to 4 times a day, however many times you're eating, it probably doesn't matter if you're consuming 40 grams of whey versus 40 grams of pea protein post-workout. And I usually tell people to take these powders or ready-to-drinks post-workout because it's easy, it's convenient. You don't have to cook a meal, maybe have your regular meal a few hours later, but do it post-workout. And I would say you're not going to find a measurable difference. Why? Because you're eating 3 or 4 other times a day. And this is sort of a mild criticism of studies that look at the acute effects of consuming protein on muscle protein synthesis. And I'm sure you're somewhat familiar with these. Like if you take, a 20 to 40 gram bolus of whey, muscle protein synthesis goes up, and then it sort of plateaus, blah, 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 blah. Well, that's all fine. But it doesn't address the fact that we don't just wake up and just consume 40 grams of whey protein and then we're done for the rest of the day. We're eating meals throughout the day. So when you're dealing with human beings that eat mixed meals throughout the day, does it really matter if it's 40 grams of whey or 20 or whatever your chosen grams amount is versus 20 to 40 grams of rice protein or pea protein? My answer to that is no. Now, I always say it depends how the question is framed. If the question is framed, if you do a head-to-head comparison of just whey protein only, and let's say soy protein only, and the measure is muscle protein synthesis, it is true in an acute sense that whey protein does better than soy. like I said before, nobody does that. I mean, nobody just eats soy or whey protein and then, hey, we're done. We're done for the day. Let's go home. We eat all day. So, and I think that's what gets lost in research. And that's why for the protein research, and I think you alluded to this earlier, I'm not a fan of just looking at the acute response. I like to do what are called time course studies. So you give people, like in some of these protein overfeeding studies I've done, I basically provided whey protein. And these are all people that were fans of whey and they always consumed it. So they're like, hey, I get free protein for like two months or whatever. And the goal was just to elevate protein intake in my first study to 4.4 grams per kilo. My second study was roughly 3.4 grams per kilo. But I also didn't change their diet. It's like, eat what you normally eat. I just want you to eat more protein from the powder. And you're somewhat familiar with those results. If you don't change your training, nothing happens. If you change your training, the very high protein intake may promote a decrease in fat mass. In terms of a gain in lean body mass, it seems like there's a threshold amount. Maybe once you hit about 2.2 grams per kilo, that's all you need for changes to lean mass. But if you want to further improve body comp through a fat mass loss change, it seems that higher protein intakes will help there. So to me, that's more valuable because it has an immediate real world application. We're not telling people to just eat whey protein and then you're done for the day. It's you got to consume it every day for 2 months. And so I think these time course studies are what's needed in the category. I don't think we need any more acute studies showing that, for the next 24 hours, muscle protein synthesis is elevated. Well, you know what? How about for the next 2 months? How about the next 6 months? I mean, and the time course studies are real hard to do. That's why they're not done. I mean, it's a pain in the butt convincing human subjects to follow your instructions for 2 months. It's a total pain in the butt. But it's the most valuable research because it gives you real world application.
Yeah, it's over a longer time span as well. The results that you can trust them more. So yeah, that was a really interesting study. So basically, in my interpretation was that if calories are kept equal, if you're not in a surplus and you eat up to 4.4 grams of protein per kg of body weight, you can potentially lose body fat, but you don't add any weight, and you can potentially add lean mass. Is that right?
If you combine it with a heavy resistance program that is geared towards bodybuilding.
Yeah.
But put it this way, if you didn't change your training at all and just jacked your protein intake up, probably nothing would happen. That's sort of the odd thing. It's like nothing. You don't gain weight, you don't lose weight, nothing happens. So, which by itself is kind of an interesting observation.
But that would have to be when calories are at maintenance, right? Because if they're in a surplus, would you?
No, well, technically the calories are at a surplus, but as you know, the intake of protein affects output because of the thermic effect of protein. So there's something else going on there. It could be one, output is increased proportionately because you can't store protein, so you got to oxidize. The other one is it is possible that the research subjects underreported their food intake and that consuming the protein actually had a appetite suppressing effect. And they didn't accurately measure or report what they were consuming. And maybe that's what contributed to it, so that maybe they weren't eating as much as they said they were eating. But then what we ended up doing is following up with all guys, and these are all bodybuilders, with people who are great at logging food. There's no one better than bodybuilders. They know exactly what they're eating because it's part of the sport. So when we follow these guys for 1 to 2 years, so they're super accurate, they can rattle off exactly how much protein they're eating. They still didn't gain body fat, even with a caloric surplus. And this is where I think it's confusing to people. Even with a caloric surplus, as protein intake kept going up, they weren't putting on fat. And in fact, they still had a hard time putting on muscle because they're already quite muscular, but they weren't putting on fat. And again, that's because input affects output. It's not like I tell people, it's not like you put money in the bank and the interest grows. It's like putting money in the bank and someone's robbing the bank every night. That's what protein's like. You're putting calories in, but calories are also exiting because of the high thermic effect.
Right. That's very interesting. So I just did a quick calculation there. So I weigh 81 kilos. So I would have been consuming, if I was in the study, I would have been consuming 358 grams of protein a day. Is that right?
Is that 4.4 or 3.4 grams per kilo?
4.4.
Oh yeah, you'd be consuming a lot. Yeah, and we had a lot of dropouts. I'll be honest. We had probably a quarter of the subjects dropped out because they couldn't eat that much. So it was tough. It was tough.
Yeah. So 275 grams to 358 grams if it was 3.4 grams per kilo. So
yes,
even if you don't add body fat, even if your body mass, the fat or muscle doesn't change, in terms of appetite regulation, that sounds like a very useful strategy. If someone is like, I'm feeling hungry, I'm feeling full, all this kind of stuff, is there any use to that, do you think?
yeah. I think. Well, here's the problem: if you're feeling hungry, well, I'm feeling hungry. The last thing I'm craving is protein per se. Um, I mean, people tend to crave foods that are mixed in macronutrients, protein, carbs, and fat, and sometimes just carbs and fat. I mean, when people are, I mean, my experience, particularly with subjects I've dealt with, and even athletes I've consulted with, when they're like starving, let's say for whatever reason, work has gotten in the way, they haven't eaten in like 6 hours, they just want calories. They're not saying I want protein. They just want food. So if you experimented and just said, hey, I'm going to eat an extra 40 grams of whey protein or pea protein per day, would it have an effect on my appetite such that I decrease intake of other things because it might blunt your appetite? I think that's one way to look at it. And that could be maybe a dietary strategy to improve body composition, possibly.
Yeah. I'm coming at it from the general population point of view, where most people's goals is to lose body fat because like 60% of the population is overweight. So to actually regulate appetite and to get into a calorie deficit is where the use might be by increasing the protein intake.
Yeah, I think that would be good. I mean, like my wife works with the general population, and as you know, adherence is always a problem with anything. And I told her if they could just do one thing, just have a protein shake after they're done training when they go home, that actually might solve a lot of their issues. One, their protein intake is usually inadequate to begin with, but two, maybe it'll blunt their appetite a little so they don't just go home and just pig out on food. Because at the end of the day, most general population individuals, they literally have no idea what they're eating in terms of total calories or carbs or fat or protein. They just don't. I'm sure you've heard complaints of, I swear I'm eating less and I'm gaining weight. I'm like, well, by definition, you're not eating less. You're eating more if you're gaining weight. So there's a bit of education there, but yeah, compliance is such a huge issue.
Yeah, that's where behavior change comes in, and that's a whole other topic. Yeah. Okay. So just one of your other studies that you did was on caffeine and exercise performance. So I think a lot of people use coffee to wake up, but how does it tie in with exercise performance and then any other benefits outside of exercise, if you know any?
Yeah, I think caffeine by itself, or even caffeine in coffee, there's plenty of data showing that it'll help performance, particularly on the endurance side. That data goes back to the 1970s when David Kossel and John Ivey did that work. And then some more recent work showing that improves performance in strength power sports. I mean, one of my master's students way back when, she looked at, this is years ago. I think she looked at bench press performance in women, comparing caffeine to placebo, and caffeine certainly helped bench press performance. So to me, caffeine is like the second best supplement, or I give it there's a 1A and 1B. 1A is creatine, 1B is caffeine, because caffeine literally will help all athletes, from the endurance stuff to the strength power stuff. And if you're talking about coffee, obviously coffee will work just as well because of the caffeine. But I actually recommend drinking coffee for its benefits in terms of health. There's a lot of data. It's observational because you can't really do a randomized controlled trial on coffee. But there's a lot of observational data suggesting that coffee itself decreases the risk of multiple cancers. It's probably the most commonly consumed food where people get their polyphenols would be coffee. I mean, I'm an avid coffee drinker. I actually used to own a coffee company a couple of decades ago. It's a great food. Well, technically, I guess it's liquid, but the food industry treats it as a food because you sell it as a bean, and a bean is technically a food. But I recommend caffeine. I use them before a race. When I do stand-up paddling races, the dosing I use is 5 milligrams per kilogram body weight, or roughly and I'm kind of lazy to convert. I'm like, yeah, I'll consume 300 to 600 mgs of caffeine before a race. And that works for me quite well, actually.
Very good. Yeah, yeah. So I guess caffeine is great, but then also I was talking to Jamie Turner about sleep. So
Yes.
can you talk a little bit about the interaction between caffeine and sleep? Because it's not all
Yeah.
good, right? You have to be careful of your sleep, which is more important, right?
Yeah, there are individuals who can consume caffeine in the evening and still fall asleep. I don't know how they do it. Like for me personally, I have to stop consuming caffeine at about noon. And then that way, when I'm ready to go to bed, the effects of it have worn off because the half-life is roughly 6.5 hours. But yeah, sleep is probably the best free recovery aid. I mean, adequate sleep is. But the interesting part is this was a project we did probably 4 years ago. We got a bunch of different athletes, and part of it was they had to wear a watch that would record sleep, and they were all sleep deprived. Or sleep deficient. On average, they were sleeping 6 to 6.5 hours a night, which, they say, well, you got to get at least 8 hours. I know Dr. Tartar's like, well, 8 hours is ideal. And I'm thinking, does anyone get 8 hours? Or is there something weird going on? Is it possible people who train may not need as much? That doesn't seem to make sense to me. But yeah, sleep, as long as caffeine doesn't interfere with sleep, I would say it's fine. But if it interferes with sleep, choose sleep over caffeine because you got to recover.
Yeah, you can only train as hard as you can recover, right?
Right, exactly.
So then another position statement was on probiotics. And I know there's like a lot of kind of emerging research on it. It's like a new trendy kind of thing to get into. You see kombucha everywhere, just like you see caffeine products everywhere. So what were the kind of the main points from that position stand that you can tell us?
What's interesting is I spoke to the lead author. He does a lot of work in probiotics. His name is Ralph Yeager. And it probably was the most difficult position stand to put together. And precisely because, which probiotics you're using, when you do these studies, which bacteria do you measure? And also there's a confounder that people who exercise, they already have, their gut microbiome is already different than people who don't exercise. So in general, and I always ask, what's the bottom line with this? I say in general, does it hurt to take probiotics? Probably not. It could be quite beneficial. But also it would help to consume foods, fermented foods like kimchi or sauerkraut. And I think you mentioned, there was something else you'd mentioned.
Kombucha.
Yeah, that. Those would be quite helpful. But at the end of the day, and I say this with almost all of, whether it's related to exercise and nutrition, that oftentimes exercise seems to cure a lot of things that, in this case, your gut microbiome, and that you can take supplements to help assist it. So to me, it's still exercise. That's number one, if you want to improve the health of your gut, and then possibly probiotics.
Would I be right in saying that whey protein, creatine don't, I won't say they have a negative effect on the gut microbiome, but they don't have a whole lot of like bacteria that'll improve your gut?
Yeah, I would say they have a neutral effect.
Neutral.
It doesn't help, doesn't hurt. The benefits, mainly, particularly with creatine, which might be underemphasized, is the benefits with the brain. I have no interest in gaining weight or losing weight. I actually take creatine for my head. I think I just feel better when I'm on it. And I tell people most people don't care about bodybuilding, and I tell them, hey, even if you don't care about lean body mass and all that, take creatine for your head. It's probably the single best. To me, it's this.
Yeah, and very low. So on probiotics and exercise, a lot of people, they'll use exercise as a tool for fat loss. And as you know, exercise is a terrible way to lose body fat. So are you saying that one of the other benefits people should exercise for or to get is to improve their gut? Like, how would that happen, or what is going on there?
The mechanism is unknown. And a lot of these are cross-sectional studies where you compare trained people to untrained people. And obviously there's a lot of confounders there because trained people do a lot of things different than untrained people. But there is something about regular exercise that improves gut health. And mechanistically, it's not known why. It could be part of the adage that, I tell people all the time, good behaviors cluster and bad behaviors cluster. It's not like we have one bad habit, you usually have multiple bad habits. You don't have one good habit, you have multiple good habits. So if, for instance, one of the good habits is you exercise, well, probably a secondary good habit is you probably eat better because you want to recover from exercise. And then the third sort of downstream effect is, well, maybe I should consider supplements that might help my health and my fitness. And that's where probiotics comes in. So there's all these different behaviors that tend to cluster, and trying to separate them is difficult because you're exercising, you're trying to eat better, you're taking supplements, and maybe you're even more cognizant of the importance of sleep. So now you're doing all these things at once. I mean, what is it that's helping gut health? Is it the probiotics? Is it eating more fermented foods? Is it you're exercising more? Or maybe is it losing weight? Certainly being overweight or obese has a negative effect. So is it that? It's impossible to tell, and it's impossible to separate all those components.
Yeah, for sure. It kind of makes me think knowing yourself, knowing your own strengths and weaknesses is like more important than any of this. So I know you're tight for time, so we'll kind of just go through some like quick fire questions. So
okay.
One question a client had was, how do they know what's a good protein to look for? Like, what would tell them, protein A is better than protein B if they're in a supplement store or online?
Okay, so if they're talking about protein supplements and not foods like chicken, beef, or fish,
yeah.
With supplements, it really depends on the goal. I think the data shows milk-based proteins are in general better than plant-based proteins. That's with regards to muscle protein synthesis. If you're eating a mixed meal, does it matter? No. The bottom line for most protein powders is adherence. Does it taste good enough that you'll keep doing it, after you work out or before you work out? To me, that's the choice. In fact, I choose that. I say, what will you stick with over the type of protein? I mean, I don't care what the data says. If you're not going to consume whey, there's no point of telling you to buy it. If you like pea protein, take pea protein. So to me, adherence or compliance is number one.
Yeah, that actually makes me think that the plant proteins I got, I won't be getting them again because the taste is just not as good.
And that's an issue.
Big issue. Yeah, the adherence is harder then. What is something that you have changed your mind on recently regarding health, exercise, or any topic underneath that?
What have I changed my mind on recently? I can't, to be honest, I don't think I have. Maybe a long time ago, I did, way back when I started writing some articles on glutamine. And I thought, well, this is a wonderful supplement. It might decrease the risk of upper respiratory tract infection. It might help your immune system. And we're talking back in the 1990s. And as data started to come out, I almost never recommend glutamine anymore because it's just not there. The only time I recommend it is if you're doing something some exercise that is so intense and long in duration that it might depress your immune system. And then maybe glutamine is a benefit, but I'm rarely asked about glutamine anymore, and I rarely even talk about glutamine anymore, even though I've published some data on it. So, but that change was over many years. It was like as data started coming out showing, it kind of has no effect on your average trained person. I'm like, oh, okay, well, forget glutamine then.
Great, yeah. So you follow the evidence and you change when there's evidence counter to your opinion. Yeah. So then, just to kind of like a broad question. If you had to broadcast one message to the homes of, every home in the US, what would you say that would be aimed at improving their health? Like what's, one message you would hope everyone would take home that they could?
Oh, I think, well, the king of everything when it comes to health is exercise. And it doesn't have to be strenuous exercise. It just has to be regular exercise. To me, exercise, regular training offsets a lot of the health issues that we see today. I mean, in the United States, I think by the end of the 20s, when we reach 2030, I think 3 out of every 4 Americans will either be overweight or obese. Now, you are correct. Exercise is not the best way to lose fat. However, if you exercise, it has downstream effects on changing other behaviors. People who exercise tend to sleep better. They are probably more cognizant of what they eat. And because of that, because of the downstream effects, it's the single best thing you can do. And I think what's missing in the last 2 years is the lack of emphasis on exercise and just maintaining a normal body weight, because at the end of the day, that's probably the single best thing you could do. I mean, you can follow whatever diet you want. At the end of the day, you're going to go off it because you will revert back to what you normally ate, probably as a child, unless you're in some sport. But if we're talking about general population, you're not going to change your diet really that drastically. You're still going to consume the same food you did as a kid. So that to me is the most important thing. I've given talks to physicians and I've told them, if you're not training, you're done. Or your patients. If they're not exercising, they're done. It's just a matter of time before they gain too much weight. They become type 2 diabetic. They become hyperlipidemic. They become hypertensive. You have to get them moving. You have to get them moving. And don't focus on the weight loss per se. Focus on the movement, and hopefully other things will take care of themselves.
Exactly. Yeah. Just like a domino effect, like you said, all the other habits of the supplements and sleep.
Yes.
Jose, that's been brilliant. Thank you so much for your time. I'll attach all the links where people can reach you and find out all your great work.